Hi, Jeff Olson here again. Um, and today we're going to be talking about caregiver guilt. Now, this is something I've personally experienced and helped a lot of people through and listened to a lot of stories. So I think it's something really, really relevant. Thank you for tuning into my channel. As always, hit that subscription link and like. And if you could leave comments, let me know if this is helping, if you're finding value in what I'm contributing. Appreciate a lot of people subscribing. Our subscriptions have grown quite a bit through the month of February, so thank you for that. So today we're going to be talking about something that many caregivers experience, but rarely talk about openly, and it's called caregiver guilt. Um, what is it? Well, we're going to talk about the psychological and biological roots of caregiver guilt and just um, some ideas that I like to discuss, kind of run by all of you and give you some things to think about that you're probably experiencing this or maybe have. So the first thing we need to talk about is defining what guilt really is, and I'll give you a good example. So my daughter, as I've told you many times, schizoaffective disorder, and a number of years ago, I was had dealt with a lot of personal trauma. My father had just passed away. Uh, my daughter was admitted to the hospital, and we were having a real hard time just living with her and dealing with the trauma every single day. And one thing I remember as I was driving home from the hospital after my wife and I dropped her off is I felt relieved. I felt relieved that I didn't have to deal with her for a while, that she was in the hospital. She's she's in good hands and so forth. But at the same time, I felt guilty for having those feelings. I felt guilty that I needed a break, that my wife and I needed a break from dealing with her trauma and her psychosis and all of the other things that were gift wrapped up in that. So it's hard. It was really hard because this is something I knew I needed. I needed that time away. I needed the stress and pressure gone for a while, and she needed to be in a place that could actually take care of her. But at the same time, I just felt incredibly guilty. What kind of a father am I? I just dropped my daughter off at the hospital and I feel happy about it. You know, I should say I felt happy. I felt relieved because I could actually get a good night's sleep without trying to listen to see if she was having issues in her room or hallucinating or talking to herself or whatever. But this is something we all experience, caregiver guilt. As I've again worked with NAMI and worked with a number of other organizations that people go. I mean, we want to do what's right. We do this because we love our loved one, our spouse, our child, whoever it is. But sometimes we set unrealistic expectations on ourselves. So I want to explore guilt and kind of a little bit about what it is. So a lot of us think of guilt as kind of a moral failing, that we failed in some way. Like me, I failed as a father, and I failed because I enjoyed dropping her off. But they sometimes think that guilt is a reflection of our personal character. But as I've been looking through this, a lot of the research has shown that guilt is actually a biological survival mechanism. It evolved to maintain social cohesion and cooperation in early human groups. Um, and feeling guilt from a biological point of view isn't about being a bad person. It's about recognizing potential threats to our relationships and social bonds. So we don't really necessarily feel enough that we are a bad person. It's more we feel like those relationships are at risk because of something we are doing or have done, like my daughter and I. So I want you to think for a minute, a little homework with this video. Think of a moment when feeling guilty actually helped you correct a behavior or strengthen a connection. And I'd be interested if you put in the comments if you have such an occasion. I'd like to hear about them. So so that's kind of the biology behind guilt. So I want to go in now and talk about types of guilt. So there's productive guilt, and then there's what we call phantom guilt. So guilt isn't bad necessarily. It can be productive. If my child is in school and they forgot to study for a test, they feel guilty about it, but that guilt might help them learn their lesson, and next time they won't procrastinate, right? So it can be a productive kind of thing. It can motivate us to act responsibly. But caregivers often experience what we refer to as phantom guilt. And this is uh, this is really, I've got a good example here. But so, for example, what is phantom guilt? Taking 30 minutes to take a nap, to eat something, or exercise may cause guilt because you should be doing something more productive, right? Um, I should be taking care of my loved one instead of watching my favorite TV show. So it's that phantom, you feel guilty, but it's something that you actually needed to do for yourself, you know? And I'll give you an example. So my grandmother was a farm wife. My grandfather had a number of cherry orchards and was a farmer here in Utah, and was a very hard worker, sun up to sundown. I remember him. I mean, his own personality. He could not stand to be around lazy people. He could sniff out a lazy person like crazy, and so it was easy for a person to feel guilty around him because he worked so hard. And it was funny because my grandmother always used to say, I totally remember this, but my grandmother would always wear one of these, house aprons that, she'd be cleaning the home or cooking meals or whatever. And I remember she told my mother that she always kept a dust rag in her pocket because she could have been working all day long and sat down to take a rest. And right when she sat down, Grandpa walks in the house and he thinks she's lazy, right? And so to avoid that, she kept a dust rag in her pocket. And she said, whenever he came in the house, if she was in the kitchen, if had paused for a minute, she would always pull the dust rag out and start wiping something down. So it would look like she was busy. And that's really sad. But it's that phantom guilt. She felt guilty for doing something that was actually good for her and that she needed, right? But, you know, probably figured that my grandpa would think she was lazy and that's something she didn't want to deal with. So, um, phantom guilt signals that your internal expectations or societal norms are misaligned with reality. Um, and essentially, it's like I said, you like me driving home, and I felt great that my daughter was in the hospital and I didn't have to deal with her, but I felt guilty about it. Why should I feel guilty? I needed that. You sit down, you take a break, you watch a TV show, you go get a meal somewhere and get away from your loved one for a while, and we feel guilty, but that's it's not right, right? But we tend to do that to ourselves. We hang that label on ourselves. And again, the word for it is phantom guilt. So I want you to think for a minute during this week. Have you found a time when you felt guilty for doing something necessary for your own well-being? Taking a break, taking a drive. Me, I live right by the Provo River. I go fly fishing all the time just to ease my mind. Have you found a time when you felt guilty for doing that because your loved one's still suffering or whatever? So I want you to think about that. Do you suffer from phantom guilt? Well, the next thing I want to go into is our next topic, and this is fairly recent. It is actually came about in 2026, and it's called digital empathy fatigue. And as you can guess, it has to do with digital media and being online. So in 2026, this thing called constant connectivity came about, and we're talking about texts, social media, monitoring apps. These things amplify feelings of inadequacy. I know a little while ago, well, it's been a couple of years now. I used to be on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. And I remember one time that I was following a political thread, and I just decided to add an opinion about something. And my gosh, name calling, questioning my mother, my heritage, everything else from people that had no idea who I was. But I internalized it and I felt horrible. I felt guilty and I felt bad. It really put me down. And it was nothing more than I had voluntarily plugged into this thread. And but we tend to do that. We tend to always feel like we need to keep up or respond to these things. And so uh, they amplify our feeling of inadequacy. We see what people are doing on Facebook, and I'm not that good. You know, my niece took her kids on a cruise, and I can't afford to take my kids on a cruise, so I feel inadequate. Right? We have all these things that just burn inside of us, but we willingly do it, and caregivers. Now you're probably wondering, well, how does this apply to caregivers? Caregivers, and you know who you are, constantly feel that you must always respond, empathize, and provide emotional support to your loved one, even remotely. That if a pin drops, they got to jump and go figure out what it was. That if the kid sneezes, they've got to go blow their nose. And I've been that way with my daughter. Like I said, when she was in her worst uh, trauma, I used to listen at her bedroom door to hear if she was actually sleeping or if she was talking to somebody or having a hallucination. And it would make me nervous. But I felt like I had to be there, that I had to attack it, and that I needed to respond all the time. And I think I told in one of the previous videos, my where I started overcoming this is, my daughter used to invent people. She used to sit at our dinner table and talk. One was a German prince that she made up. His name was Frederick. In fact, she pronounced it Friedrich. She took German in high school, and she would talk to him, and it used to freak me out. Like, there's nobody there. Why are you talking to this invisible person? In her mind, it was very real. And one day I sat and I thought to myself, so what? I mean, there are much worse things she could be doing, right? And when I finally understood it and let go of that need to constantly respond, when she'd sit down to the dinner table, we set a plate for Frederick. And we'd say, "Oh, so how's Frederick doing? Does he like the potatoes?" And we just let it go. We let the stress go. I don't need to respond. I don't need to try to fix it. I don't need to Google another drug that we can give her to make her stop doing this. I just let it go. And it was so liberating. And and at the end of the day, after a few weeks, she stopped talking to him. And I'm not sure. I'm not saying that that's what caused her to forget about it, but it certainly put my mind at ease and de-stressed me a lot. And um, so I want you to think about this. How has being always available affected you and your sense of guilt and your sense of stress? Uh, I didn't know my spouse was not suffering with this, so I'm sure it kind of exacerbates when you're in a spousal relationship that you always need to be responding and dealing with things. I want you to think about that. So, digital empathy fatigue, by definition, is a state of emotional exhaustion, numbness, decreased capacity for compassion, caused by constant, overwhelming exposure to distressing news, social crises, and others suffering via social media and digital screens. It acts as a protective psychological shutdown when the brain's capacity for empathy is stretched beyond its limit by the 24/7 high arousal nature of online content. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you know, there are I mean, social media just affects everything we do now. I'm at the age group where I don't do that much of it, but boy, I tell you, the Gen Xers, Gen Ys, Gen Zs are coming up, and this is where they live. Everybody has to see what they had for dinner and what they thought about the most recent movie or whatever fleeting thought they had. Then in 30 seconds, they want to broadcast to the world, right? Your brain's capacity in this case is stretched beyond its limit by this high arousal of online content. And I'll go one further and say negative and traumatic content. And this could be political content, religious content. It could be um, any kind of world news that you're addicted to, that you have to consume all the time. One of my things that I broke away from a few years ago, I'm a big sports fanatic, and I found myself that I just couldn't unplug, that I had to, on my phone, I had to be checking scores, I had to be watching replays all the time. And one day I finally told my wife, I said, I need to break away from this. And I just literally went cold turkey and canceled all of my sports subscriptions, all of those, because I would get frustrated because I tend to cheer for teams that are not doing very well. So it stresses me out, right? And I have to tell you how liberating it's been since I just divorced myself from that. But we love this, and the information is so prevalent. I mean, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I grew up during the Vietnam War, and I tell my wife this all the time. I said it's kind of funny during Watergate and Nixon and Johnson and the Vietnam War. We had three channels, okay, and at night you had the 6 o'clock news that lasted for a half an hour, and at 10 o'clock you had the local news that lasted for about 40 minutes, and that was enough. I knew everything I needed to know about Vietnam and the war and Nixon and Watergate and the elections in literally an hour's worth of information a day. And with the advent of CNN and cable news and 24/7 and whatever, we're now exposed to it all the time. And our brains are just not wired to keep up with that. And so consequently, it affects us negatively. And just like caregivers, we feel like we have to be exposed to this all the time. We have to react, we have to find a solution, and your brains cannot handle it. So, this relentless consumption of negative or highly emotional content can cause this numbness, feeling of being overwhelmed, burnout, anxiety, this thing they call survivor's guilt, that I feel bad because you're suffering. I wish I could suffer for you. Um, some of us obsessively check bad news. We want to keep track of the rotten things that are coming out in the world, and it's crazy. It's crazy. Um, and there's a thing called the misery bubble, uh, that basically things that amplify outrage and fear, the things that you watch, like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, when you connect into a video, there are algorithms behind the scenes that know what you're connecting to. So it automatically feeds you more of that information, thus making that guilt, making that anxiety even more prevalent. So, um, we as humans are wired to be empathetic within small social groups. Okay. Your family, your friends, maybe your workplace. We are not wired to be empathetic with the world, with the daily global influx of pain. And that is where we start feeling guilty and overwhelmed and unable to keep up. And I've seen it time and time again with groups that I've worked with, just that constant frustration that I need it because I see it, I've got to respond to it. And because of that, I feel that pain and that guilt. Well, um, I presented the problem, and it's something you guys are probably nodding your head going, yeah, you're right. So I want to talk about our next little uh, discussion point here. And I called it reframing the well-rested caregiver. Um, like I said, I've done a lot of groups with NAMI, and I know right at the end of our sessions, we'd go around the room and say, "What are you going to do this week for self-care?" Meaning, like I said a couple of weeks ago, there's a reason when you go in an airplane, they say put the oxygen mask on yourself, before you help the person next to you. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Self-care means taking care of yourself. If you're not in a good state of mind, it's going to be really hard for you to take care of your loved one. So research shows that caregivers that have sufficient rest are more patient, more attentive, and more effective. What does rest mean? It means doing something for yourself, doing something besides researching new drugs or new treatments or spending more time with your loved one or taking less personal time because you feel guilty. What it means, like I said with my fly fishing example, in my worst times with my daughter, when I just knew I couldn't handle it anymore, I would grab my pole and my rod and my gear and my waders, and I'd walk 2 blocks to the Provo River. And sometimes, they call it fishing for a reason because I don't call it catching. And I would just stand in the river and enjoy that serenity, just the water and casting my line and just nature, the birds and whatever. And it just got me away. And it was something I was doing for myself. Some people say they go walking, some people develop an exercise regimen, but do something for yourself. And if you rest enough, and I know it seems counterintuitive because I should be taking care of them 24/7. You're not a nurse, you're not a psychiatrist. Okay. More time does not equal better care. It equals more stress, more anxiety, more burnout. So, self care can be defined as enhancing your caregiving capability and can reduce guilt significantly. So, that's one thing I want you to do. I want you to share. If you want to share in the comments, this would be great. What are you doing for self care, or are you? And it doesn't have to be something tremendous. You don't have to be fly fishing on the river. It could just be, yeah, I locked myself in my room and I got out a good book, something I haven't read in years, or I started journaling, or I went to the mall and just went walking just to free my mind of all of my stress. It can be something very, very simple. Okay. And I'll leave a few examples in the comments. Like I said, fly fishing has been my big one. I also paint, I watercolor paint. And many times that's what I do. Um, Last Christmas, I watercolored Christmas cards. In fact, I have a few of them here. I can maybe show you next time. But so it was enjoyable. It was fun. It got me away. It was a talent that I had, and it was fun, and it got me away. And it allowed my mind to rest. It doesn't mean go to sleep necessarily. It means just rest your weary mind, right? So that's one thing I want you to do. Share a self-care habit that helps you feel more capable and present in your caregiving. Okay. Lastly, we're going to move into this next one, the societal expectations and your emotional availability. Society often sets unrealistic expectations that caregivers should be constantly emotionally available, right? Because you're a caregiver and you have a mentally ill son, daughter, spouse, grandma, uncle, aunt, whatever, that because you're the healthy one, you need to be constantly there for them. Okay. I'll tell you a little example from my life. When I was about 17 years old, my grandfather came to live with my family. And at that time, it was just me and my mom and dad. And his wife had passed away. He had fallen and broken his hip and couldn't live alone anymore. And so he came to live with us. And my mother loved her to death. She was the ultimate altruist. She put herself out there. But my grandpa was a chain smoker. We did not smoke in my home, right? But she brought him in. We had to wire up a fan above his chair. My mom bought his cigarettes. Um, in, you know, in the middle of the night, his bedroom was down by mine. He'd need to get up and go to the bathroom, so I had to jump out of bed and go help him to the bathroom. Every time he talked, somebody in the house would jump. It was constant. My poor mother, had absolutely no time for herself. She was constantly waiting on him and taking care of him. Now, a little different story. It wasn't mental illness. It was old. He was aged older. He was in his 80s, but it's the same principle. My mom was was a mess. I mean, it wore her out. And nobody has the capability of doing that. Now, later on, my own mother, who died of brain cancer back in 2013, um, flipped the script, right? She's dying of brain cancer. And I remember they did surgery on her, and one of us, I have four siblings, three brothers and a sister, and we all stood there going, well, which one of us is going to move in or take her in with us and so forth. And the surgeon looked at, because again, we saw that's what she had done with her dad. And the surgeon looked right at us and he goes, you don't want to do that. That's the worst thing you can do for your family. Get her somebody that could come in and take care of her professionally, visit her, help her, but don't be the one to take on that role of the 24/7 caregiver. And as a result, we didn't. My dad, of course, was still alive and he lived with her as long as she was alive. And we got nursing care to come in, professionals to come in and help her. But society kind of expects caregivers to be this 24/7 constant person, is constantly emotionally available. Well, internalizing these expectations amplifies your guilt. If you feel like you have to be that, then you're guilty for every little thing that you don't do. If I sit down to take a nap, I feel guilty because I should be constantly taking care of my loved one. Now, you need to understand these are not universally accepted truths that can reduce self-blame. Okay. This is not true. This is what society may think, but it's not the truth. So we need to set limits as loved ones. I'm not telling you to totally ignore them, right? You can't do that. But, you know, Clint Eastwood, man's got to know his limitations, right? Limit yourself, set your boundaries, set healthy boundaries so that you can be a better caregiver. Like I said a minute ago, I said, well, uh, a well-rested caregiver is more patient, attentive, and effective. So, do you want to be more attentive? Do you want to be more effective? Or do you want to just burn yourself out and hate your loved one? That's really what it comes down to. So, setting limits isn't rejection, it's preservation. So, I want you to think now for a minute, write down, if you can, one expectation that you feel pressured to meet. Okay. That you need to know more than the doctor does, whatever, I don't know, whatever expectation that you feel right now that you're pressured to do or to meet with your loved one. Then ask yourself, is this expectation really necessary for the well-being of my loved one? Or is it a societal ideal? Why are you doing it? Okay. So I want you to think about that for a minute. So, and then we talk about boundaries and limits. It's preservation, it's not rejection. Okay. By taking care of yourself, you sustain your capacity to care for others. So, schedule a short walk each day. Turn off your phone for 30 minutes. It isn't neglect, it's strategic caregiving. Okay. So, in this video, I'm not talking anything about how to care for your loved one. It's more how to care for yourself, how to make the realistic expectations of yourself. And so, set some boundaries. Do it right now. Hey, I'd like to get up every morning, take a 30-minute walk. Amazing what that can do in your ability to deal with the stress and the problems that come up during the day, right? So share a boundary. If you want to put it on in the comments, set a boundary that you've set that benefited your care recipient. I already told you one of mine. Fly fishing helped my daughter. I know that sounds weird, but it really did, because I came home and I was a lot more adept and ready and apt to take care of her and to deal with that, because I had that moment or that hour or two where I just didn't think about it and I did something for myself. So, to wrap this up, just remember, guilt is not a moral flaw, it is biological. And there is productive guilt and phantom guilt. Productive guilt, I forgot to study for my test. I feel bad. I'm going to study next time. That's productive. Phantom guilt. I feel guilty because I dropped my daughter off at the hospital and I'm getting a break. That's phantom guilt. I shouldn't feel guilty for that. She's in a good place. She was probably better off than coming home with me anyway, right? Digital empathy fatigue is real. Get offline, man. Don't let social media dictate your thoughts and actions. Unplug like I had to from sports. It just doesn't do you any good. Well-rested caregivers are high quality resources. Societal expectations are often unrealistic of what we're expected to do, and boundaries are acts of preservation. So hopefully this has been helpful. I hope you go back, take that homework, leave some things in the comments, especially what you're doing for self-care, what boundaries you're setting to make sure that you're a better caregiver or more plugged in and attuned to your loved one. Thank you for listening. I know this one's been kind of long, but it needed to be said. I appreciate you guys plugging in and listening. Uh, Promote me if you can to others who you think might be able to use this. Hit the subscribe and the like. That really helps me. Again, I'm not making any money off this. This is just me doing it. I do have a nonprofit that I will be launching very soon. Actually, been working on the website right around March 5th or 6th. I'll put the URL in here. It's called Deep River Mental Health Fund. And it's essentially a way that we can raise money for those who cannot afford mental health care. That's the short answer. So look forward to that as well. This is something I do in conjunction with that. Um, I just do this as a labor of love and trying to pass along some of the things that I've learned over 14 years in taking care of loved ones who suffer from mental illness. So thanks a lot. Have an awesome day. Remember, take care of yourself, do something for yourself, set those boundaries, and try not to feel guilty for feeling better. Thank you.